cemented. I know I'm wearing a mask. And I'm not blind, which means I know that most of you are wearing one as well. I believe in life we focus too much on the messenger and not enough on the message. So it doesn't really matter what I look like, where I came from. What matters is what is my intent in holding a microphone and standing in front of all of you at the same level, because I'm no better. It's because I truly believe that we can save the world one one at a time. And I come to places like this because I truly believe that I can take part in that happening. This is called Remember. Do you remember how great your conversations used to be before you ever owned a cell phone? Do you remember how useful your hands used to be before you were obsessed with holding it? And do you remember the beautiful images displayed in the vast sky through the clouds that you were more inclined to stare at than a 2.4-inch cell phone screen? Do you remember when an apple was a nutritious fruit and not a sign of mass consumerism? Do you remember when you didn't need a website to keep track of how many friends you had because your hands did it so much better? Do you remember when the most extreme form of cosmetic surgery was someone getting a mole removed? And when a Barbie doll was just a little girl's toy and not a morbid standard for beauty? Do you remember when 16 channels on the television were more than enough? Do you remember when you were more inclined to look for reality by looking outside of your window than into your television screen? Guys, do you remember when you would prefer to play a sport than to rush home and watch someone else do it on TV? Do you remember when the only pill you would ever consider taking was a Flintstone vitamin? Do you remember when there wasn't a convenient acronym for what was wrong, so you just called it stress? Do you remember when the war on drugs needed to be waged on the streets and not against the pharmaceutical companies that are so convinced that there's money in convincing us we're broken? Do you remember when staying home was your parents' way of punishing you because you hated being home? Do you remember when you only needed the things you only need? And you only spent money you actually had? Do you remember when fun wasn't expensive, as long as you had good people around you? Do you remember when you ate because you were actually hungry, and not just because you were bored? Do you remember when you were more concerned with chasing the ice cream truck than the false American dream?
Yes. Still chasing.
Do you remember when you only pretended to be someone you weren't because you knew you were just pretending? Do you remember when you were a slave to your instincts and not your paycheck? Do you remember being so honest with your emotions that you cried when you were sad, yelled when you were angry, and were willing to show weakness in times of struggle? Do you remember when people were more concerned with giving you a hug than their business card? Do you remember when people were more concerned with their own lives than rummaging through the latest $2 magazine filled with pictures of what's going on in the lives of celebrities? Grown women who don't even know that their daughters dye their hair, but know what Britney Spears drank during lunch. Do you remember how driven you were before you ever even held a steering wheel? Do you remember a time in your life where money was only the basis of your decision because you were flipping a coin and not deciding who your mate would be, which one earned the most? Do you remember when the rain would turn the world into a giant water park you couldn't wait to get to, instead of the rain turning into a dreary excuse to stay inside? Do you remember when you weren't so afraid of everything for nothing? When honesty didn't require so much effort and lying didn't come so naturally? Do you remember when you were more concerned with finding the source of the pain than just finding a pill to make it go away? Do you remember when you could look to the future with a sense of hope and not anxiety? Do you remember when you didn't feel so broken and so beaten? When you didn't have so much trouble falling asleep and getting out of bed didn't take so much coaching? Do you remember looking in the mirror every morning and absolutely and indisputably loving everything you saw? You see, sometimes to remember, you have to forget. Forget how many footsteps you've invested in this path that you don't even want to walk anymore. Forget the lies you've told and the facts that you have to keep straight because none of them are really facts. Forget how many times you've tried and failed. Forget how many times you've loved and lost. Forget the amount of insults from people trying to bring you down. Because the trick to beating someone in a race is to try and convince them that they're on the wrong path. Do you remember where you were standing the last time you stood for something? If not, let this place be that place. Let this moment be that moment. You are everything you never said you couldn't be. You are everything you never said you couldn't be. And whoever you were yesterday has nothing to do with tomorrow unless you choose for it to. Put the microphone back on the stand. And maybe out of respect, maybe because you related to what I said on some level, or maybe because you're thankful that the guy with the mask is going to shut up and let you continue, you might be tempted to clap. But I'm tempted to challenge you. See, those two hands can do far more than praise a guy who could really care less about his popularity. If this were a popularity contest, I wouldn't be wearing a mask. Take those two hands and do something. Create something. Fix something that's broken. Take the hands and the arms they're connected to and embrace someone. Take that thumb and that cell phone you love so much, go through your phone book and call someone you haven't spoken to for weeks, months, maybe years. You're looking for an excuse why wait till someone's funeral. Today I gave you an excuse. But whatever you do, with those two amazing hands, the last thing I want or need is an applause. Your silence is your applause. Thank you.